Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Gaurav Sharma and with me is Renuka, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, shot dead. World leaders express grief over his demise. Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, condoles the death of Japan's former Prime Minister, lauds Abe's contribution in strengthening the India-Japan relations. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar meets his Russian counterpart in Bali on the sidelines of the G20 Foreign Ministers meet. Russian President Vladimir Putin asks Ukraine to accept Moscow's terms or get ready to brace for the worst. Enforcement Directorate issues show cause notice to Amnesty India International Private Limited. Indian shuttler HS Pranoy defeats Kanta Suneyama of Japan to enter the semi-finals of the Malaysia Masters Badminton at Kuala Lumpur. And in cricket, India to take on England in the second T20 International of the three-match series at Birmingham on Saturday. Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has died in hospital after he was shot at a political campaign event in Nara this morning. Abe was shot at twice while he was giving a speech on a street in the city of Nara. According to the police, the suspect named Tetsuya Yamagami admitted shooting Abe with a homemade gun and said that he had a grudge against a specific organization. Police officers in a press conference said that several other handmade weapons similar to those used in the attack had been confiscated after a search of the suspect's house. Meanwhile, Prime Minister of Japan, Fumio Kishida, condemned the attack and said it is barbaric and malicious and cannot be tolerated. Mr. Kishida said that this attack was an act of brutality that happened during the elections, the very foundation of our democracy, and is absolutely unforgivable. According to the doctors, Abe sustained 2 bullet wounds to the front of his neck during the attack and also damage to his heart. He was said to be conscious and responsive in the minutes after the attack, but the 67-year-old's condition deteriorated. Doctors said that no vital signs were detected by the time the former Prime Minister was transferred for treatment and he had to receive a blood transfusion in the hospital. Abe, who was Japan's longest-serving Prime Minister, held office in 2006 for a year and then again from 2012 to 2020 before stepping down citing health reasons. Condemning the incident, US President Joe Biden has said that he is stunned, outraged and deeply saddened. He said that Abe was a champion of the alliance between our nations and the friendship between our people. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol called the attack an unacceptable act of crime and extended condolences to the Japanese people for having lost their longest-serving Prime Minister and a respected politician. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhou Lijiang in his statement has said that his country was shocked by the attack. He added that this unexpected incident should not be associated with Sino-Japanese relations and had no comment when asked about the Chinese social media reaction. We have a desk report.
The shooting of ex-Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is only the 5th involving a political leader of that country since 1990, according to Japanese broadcaster NHK. The most recent was 15 years ago. Nagasaki Mayor Ito Itko was shot dead in 2007 by a criminal group. The list of gun attacks on Japanese political leaders includes only one other involving a prime minister. In 1994, ex-PM Hosokawa Morihiro was fired on by a right-wing group member while at a hotel in Tokyo. Fortunately, he escaped unhurt. In 1992, another member of a right-wing group opened fire on Kanemaru Shin, the then Vice President of the Liberal Democratic Party LDP, at an event in Tochigi Prefecture, which is 108 kilometers north of Tokyo. He too was unharmed. 2 years before the attack on Shin in 1990, Motoshima Hitoshi, the then mayor of Nagasaki, was seriously injured in an attack also by a right-wing member. A fifth gun attack took place in 1995 in Tokyo. Then Commissioner of Japan's National Police Agency was shot and seriously wounded near his residence. In Japan, senior political leaders are accompanied by armed security but sometimes do get close to the public, especially during the campaigns. Anita Anand for World News, All India Radio.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has also expressed grief over the demise of former Prime Minister of Japan Shinzo Abe. Addressing the gathering at first Arun Jaitley Memorial Lecture in New Delhi, Prime Minister Modi remembered former Prime Minister of Japan Shinzo Abe.
आज का दिन मेरे लिए अपूर्णीय क्षति और असहनीय पीड़ा का दिन है। मेरे घनिष्ठ मित्र और जापान के पूर्व प्रधानमंत्री श्री शिंजो आबे अब हमारे बीच नहीं रहे हैं। आबा जी मेरे तो साथी थे ही, वो भारत के भी उतने ही विश्वसनीय दोस्त थे। उनके कार्यकाल में भारत जापान में उनके जो राजनीतिक संबंध थे हमारे, वो को नई ऊंचाई तो मिली ही। हमने दोनों देशों की साझी विरासत से जुड़े रिश्तों को भी खूब आगे बढ़ाया। आज भारत के विकास की जो गति है, जापान के सहयोग से हमारे यहाँ जो कार्य हो रहे हैं, इनके जरिए शिंजो आबे जी भारत के जनमन में सालों तक बसे रहेंगे। मैं एक बार फिर दुखी मन से मेरे दोस्त को श्रद्धांजलि देता हूँ।
Paying tribute to Shinzo Abe, Prime Minister Narendra Modi today also wrote a blog and said, Abe was an outstanding leader of Japan, a towering global statesman, and a great champion of India-Japan friendship. He said, Japan and the world have lost a great visionary and I have lost a dear friend. Remembering his first meeting with Shinzo Abe, Prime Minister said he first met him in 2007 during his first visit to Japan as the Chief Minister of Gujarat. He added that right from the first meeting, our friendship went beyond the trappings of office and the shackles of official protocol. Mr. Modi wrote that every meeting with Abe-san was intellectually stimulating and he was always full of new ideas and invaluable insights on governance, economy, culture, foreign policy, and various other subjects. The Prime Minister also said his counsel inspired him in economic choices for Gujarat and added that his support was instrumental in building Gujarat's vibrant partnership with Japan. In his blog, Prime Minister also shared the pictures of Shinzo Abe during his visit in Gujarat and other bilateral meetings. Earlier in the day, in a series of tweets, Mr. Modi said he is shocked and saddened beyond words at the tragic demise of one of his dearest friends, Shinzo Abe. He said Mr. Abe made an immense contribution to elevating India-Japan relation to the level of a special strategic and global partnership. He said on Friday the whole India mourns with Japan and India stands in solidarity with Japan in this difficult moment.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on India-Japan relations and the role of Shinzo Abe. In conversation are Shilkant Sharma, a former diplomat, and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, a journalist.
In an immensely shocking incident in that normally peaceful nation this morning, the former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, was shot twice by an assailant while he was delivering a campaign speech in Nara in western Japan. Mr. Abe, who was taken to hospital in a gravely critical condition, has since died. It has been officially confirmed now. India, led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, with whom Mr. Abe shared a close personal bond, have been deeply shocked and saddened by the assassination of Mr. Abe, and national mourning has been declared in India tomorrow. Mr. Abe was the longest-serving Prime Minister of Japan and has been widely credited with personally investing in pushing for much improved ties with India, and he himself visited India many times. Mr. Abe also pushed for the concept of the Indo-Pacific and the Quadrilateral of Democracies, or Quad, which has now become an important pillar of India's foreign policy. Today, India's relations with Japan are among the closest possible, with deep geostrategic and geo-economic linkages. Japan is one of the very few countries with which India has a mechanism of an annual summit, and India has been the largest recipient of Japanese overseas development aid. This shocking incident has opened up a lot of questions, and to answer some of these We are joined today by Ambassador Shilkant Sharma, who will try and explain how this happened, and what this means for India-Japan relations. This is an extremely shocking incident. What do you think happened? How did this happen?
Yes, I echo your sense of shock, and seems like a lone wolf attack, because doesn't seem to have any connection so far on the basis of the stories which are coming out. He used to have a background of security personnel, and he had strong feelings against Prime Minister Abe. And then he was prepared well because he had an improvised pistol hidden in a camera, hit him, and he shot him on the chest. So when I heard about it, I was actually quite depressed, because it appeared though they had taken him to the hospital, but his condition was critical, and on the way he had cardiac arrest. So his survival was a matter of, it was a very thin chance. So this news which has come is really deeply shocking. It saddens us, because we in India, who always felt relations with Japan are the most important in Asia, respected Abe because of his insight, his unequivocal, perceptions. He didn't mince word. Like, he wanted to take Japan out of the post-war, guilt-ridden, slightly defensive orientation. And despite Japan's capabilities and capacity, Japan was not coming on its own. So it was Shinzo Abe who, in his 8 years, from 12 to 20, really moved forward despite many odds. Then his strategic perception, as you mentioned, about the Indo-Pacific, and he also felt that relations with India are geostrategically and geoeconomically Japan's most important relationship in Asia. There was a certain compatibility, coherence between our two countries when he was leading. And he had very excellent relations with our successive prime ministers. He went off very well with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and then Prime Minister Modi and him, they had a very great personal rapport, and the kind of visits that both of them exchanged. It made us feel very nice, very comfortable. And then the Japanese, in 2020, when he resigned on health grounds, we felt that the leader of Japan was from his own party. So that line will be continued. And that has been so, as has been evident in the figures, like the maximum investment in the last 20 years or so, $39 billion, 1,500 Japanese companies.
Mr. Abe was a former prime minister of Japan. And yet this morning he was in this sort of little nooker kind of street corner, as it were, addressing a rally. So, the height of sort of democratic practice, in the sense of a small corner meeting with local residents to lobby for a particular candidate from his Liberal Democratic Party. And security, from the visuals that one has seen, security did not, seem almost non-existent, as it were, except that after they all got sort of activated after the shooting. Is it was it a security lapse in some ways? Or is it just that the nature of Japan is so peaceful that these things don't occur to people?
Seeing from India where we stand, it is clearly a security lapse, because the story in the morning was that his security entail actually saw the man shoot once and they still didn't overpower him. And, if you look at the US, for instance, where when President Reagan was shot, the assailant was immediately overpowered. And, those few moments which are there between the first shot and second, they are vital for the VIP. And that's where they lacked. And then second, how did they allow the access? What about the metal testing, etc.? So there, I think the lapses were very much like the lapses in Rajiv Gandhi's assassination in the South when it happened during election rally.
So there must have been some kind of intelligence that Mr. Abe was a potential target. But as you said, this is a lone wolf kind of an attack. But even then, his security as a former prime minister needed to be a little more around him and visible, because gun violence is now only visible really in the United States. You don't associate it with Japan. But this was very, very shocking indeed from multiple levels.
We are passing through very, very disturbing times. These times, the kind of things which are happening were unexpected. And in these times, any sense of complacence about security, either of a country, of personnel or VIP, cannot be forgiven. In the case of Japan, yes, it's a very peace-loving society and people respect each other. There's a lot of, personal courtesies and their democratic system. Even opposition in the parliament is in the Japanese. They are civilized opposition, not the kind of fisticuffs which break into other parliaments. This kind of extreme act, taking the life of a venerable leader, is really beyond one's imagination and belief.
Mr. Abe, when he first came and addressed the Indian Parliament in 2007, he spoke of the confluence of the two oceans, as it were, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, bringing about that whole strategic concept of the Indo-Pacific. Both Japan and India are not really comfortable with China. What do you think were the contours of what his vision was?
I think his vision was, as expressed in successive summits and the declarations after that, the joint statements, it covered all azimuth between India and Japan. Technology, trade, investment, the frontiers of climate change technology, the projects to be done in India, like this entire Western corridor with 12 cities on the way to develop, is a very ambitious plan, and it is taking shape between Delhi and Bombay.
Yes.
And same way his Ahmedabad-Mumbai bullet train, these are projects in India which will transform India's infrastructure and India's industrial development. So his vision is far-reaching, and it is shorn of any doubts or hesitations. Our EM once said about recently that hesitations of history. Now, in the case of Japan, the hesitations of history are put aside. And in the case of India, also hesitations of history are put aside. And both are ready to embrace each other in a comprehensive relationship moving forward for mutual benefit and for regional and global stability. Asia, for instance, Japan and India together make a powerful force in favor of rule of law, in the favor of pluralism, democracy. And he lived and died, as the unfortunate day-to-day shows. He died in the manner in which a true Democrat does, totally unassuming, almost anonymous at a nukkad or a road corner talking about candidate forthcoming elections.
The other thing was, Mr. Abe, all said and done, was probably the closest to Japanese political sort of royalty. His grandfather was also Prime Minister of Japan. And so there was a great deal of the, enthusiasm of a common, a normal human being in other cultures, as well as, of course, a great deal of insight into how things should develop. Would you agree with that assessment?
I agree fully. This is an evolved system there where, like his grandpa, the Prime Minister, was the first to visit India after our independence, 1957, when he visited India. At that time, his visit was really also a high point in Pandit Nehru's time.
Yes.
And India, was, if you remember the 50s, India had a particular view of Japan. For instance, we defended Japan and these trials. They wanted to do Nuremberg type of trials, and India was in favor of, was in support of Japan in its defense, and they appreciated it. That was the early foundation of relationship. Then during the Cold War, because of the US-India differences, the shadow fell on Japan as well. But in spite of that, through the 80s, for instance, the Maruti car project was a project with Japan, and the way it has grown in India, it's a testimony to kind of things which Japan wanted India to do. So it's Japan's attitude to India has been positive, the ebbs and flows of relationship. But Prime Minister Abe represented the high point from the very beginning. He visited India even when he was not even Prime Minister. I think he was just MP and he visited here, and he traveled into India. Then the way he treated Prime Minister Modi when he visited Japan, he took him to his personal, family ancestral home, and that kind of hospitality. And in Kyoto, the way they met in a cultural setting. So Abe understood India's cultural civilizational roots. And he happily related to them in a very, consonant manner. It was, and that confluence word has a certain emotional communication. So I fully agree with you that he really transformed the approach to our bilateral relationship, and he transformed the outlook for geostrategy and geopolitics in Asia.
Ambassador Sharma, the northeast of India is a particular area of Japanese focus, since Mr. Abe's time especially. And I think the whole vision of India's Act East policy now has gelled very well with Japan's Look West policy in terms of the Asian subcontinent. So how would you, again, explain that vision? How do you explain this particular aspect of the relationship, the focus on the Northeast?
There again, I would say that under Prime Minister Abe, Japan saw very clearly India's priorities. And the high priority which the Indian government has been placing on the northeastern development, Japan responded to that. And so that shows also a certain depth of understanding about each other's concerns and priorities, I would say. Northeast is very important for Prime Minister's Act East policy. And the kind of investment and the whole thing which is being done. So that has been, very important for us. Then, Japan has also been working with India. Now that you mentioned Northeast, apart from that, Japan has also been keen to work with India in trilateral projects or third country projects where we can combine and gel our strengths for the benefit of the countries of the south. So in Africa and even in Sri Lanka, Japan and India are working together on projects. So, and even in the dire straits that Sri Lanka has been, Japan has also come out to help them. And that is in coordination with India.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Sharma. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that real growth is not possible without inclusion. He said the government has taken several steps in the last 8 years to ensure inclusive growth by providing better healthcare facilities and basic amenities to the poor people. Prime Minister Narendra Modi today attended the first Arun Jaitley Memorial Lecture in New Delhi. While addressing the gathering, Mr. Modi said the theme of this lecture, Growth Through Inclusivity through Growth, is a very appropriate as inclusive development is necessary for real growth.
This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter using our Twitter handle at AIR News Alerts.
External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar met Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov at Bali on the sidelines of G20 Foreign Ministers meeting. Both the leaders discussed bilateral matters of mutual interest. They also exchanged views on contemporary regional and international issues, including the Ukraine conflict and Afghanistan. At the Bali meeting, participating foreign ministers are deliberating on issues of contemporary relevance, such as strengthening multilateralism and current global challenges, including food and energy security. G20 members represent more than 80% of the world GDP, 75% of international trade, and 60% of the world population. In May this year, former Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla was appointed as the coordinator for the G20 summit, which will be hosted by India in 2023.
Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday warned Kyiv that it should quickly accept Moscow's terms or brace for the worst. Mr. Putin further said that Russia has barely started its action. Speaking at a meeting with the leaders of the parliament, the Russian president accused the Western powers of fueling the hostilities, charging that the West wants to fight us until the last Ukrainian. He asserted that Russia remains ready to sit down for talks to end the fighting, adding that those who refuse to do so should know that the longer it lasts, the more difficult it will be for them to make a deal with us.
Ahead of the monsoon season, Health Minister Dr. Mansukh Mandavia on Friday reviewed the preparedness for the prevention and control of vector-borne diseases with 13 high-burden states through video conference. These states are Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal, Jharkhand, Maharashtra, Punjab, Rajasthan, Tripura, Delhi, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha and Tamil Nadu. Dr. Mandavia exhorted states to ensure intersectoral coordination and work closely with other related departments such as urban development, rural development, and water and sanitation.
The Enforcement Directorate, ED, has issued a show cause notice to Amnesty India International Private Limited, AIIPL, and its CEO, Akar Patel, for contravention of the provisions of the Foreign Exchange Management Act, FEMA. It has also imposed a penalty to the tune of around 62 crore rupees. The ED said that Amnesty International UK has been remitting a huge amount of foreign contribution through its Indian entities following foreign direct investment route to expand its NGO activities in India. The agency said that in order to evade the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, FCRA, the AIIPL was executing such activities despite denial of prior registration or permissions to the AIIFT and other trusts under the FCRA by the Home Affairs Ministry.
Around 1 million people from across the world converged at plains of Arafat in Saudi Arabia on Friday for the main ritual of Hajj. More than 79,000 pilgrims from India also performed Hajj, as Saudi authorities allowed some 850,000 pilgrims from outside the kingdom to participate first time after the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak.
India-China bilateral relations have generally shown a recovery momentum as the two countries have maintained communication and exchanges and effectively managed their differences since March this year, said the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi during his meeting with the External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar in Bali on Thursday. During the one-hour meeting on the sidelines of the Group of 20 G20 Foreign Ministers meeting, Dr. Jaishankar conveyed to Wang the need for an early resolution of all the outstanding issues along the line of actual control LAC in eastern Ladakh, and asserted that bilateral ties should be based on mutual respect, mutual sensitivity and mutual interest.
Indian shuttler H.S. Pranoy defeated Kanta Tsuneyama of Japan in two direct sets by 25-23, 22-20 in the men's singles quarter-final Malaysia Masters Badminton in Kuala Lumpur. Earlier, India's ace shuttler P.V. Sindhu lost to Chinese Taipei Taizu Ying 13-21, 21-12, 12-21 in women's single quarter-final match.
In cricket, India will take on England tomorrow in the second T20 International of the three-match series at Birmingham at 7 p.m. India is leading the three-match series 1-0 with last night's win in the first encounter at the Ageas Bowl Stadium in Southampton.
And now a report from the business desk.
Sensex climbed 303 points, or 0.56% to finish at 54,482. Nifty also gained 88 points, or 0.54% to end at 16,221. At the global stock markets, Asian stocks logged modest gains except China Shanghai Composite Index, which fell marginally by 0.3%. South Korea's Kospi climbed 0.7% and Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index rose 0.4%. Singapore's Straits Times and Japan's Nikkei 225 both added 0.1% each. European shares were trading mixed in intraday trade. Global crude oil prices added marginally in a volatile trade, but the crude prices were heading for a weekly decline as concern over a potential recession-driven demand downturn outweighed tight global supplies. In intraday trade, Brent crude was trading at $104.90 per barrel. And at the foreign exchange market, the rupee weakened by 8 paise against the US dollar to close at 79 rupees and 25 paise against the American unit. Arjun Chowdhury for World News, All India Radio.
And now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Washington Post writes, Biden to outline new steps aimed at bolstering abortion rights.
New York Times notes Boris Johnson quits amid latest scandal, a messy end to a messy tenure.
The Wall Street Journal writes, Shinzo Abe, a former Japanese prime minister, died after being shot on Friday during an election campaign rally, sending shockwaves through a country unaccustomed to gun violence.
Financial Times writes, U.S. economy added 372,000 jobs in June amid red-hot labor demand.
South China Morning Post reports Xi allies lay out Chinese president's global risk outlook in countdown to the Communist Party Congress.
And The Guardian reports Rishi Sunak launches bid to replace Boris Johnson as Conservative leader.
And before we end the bulletin, a quick look at the headlines once again. Former Prime Minister of Japan Shinzo Abe shot dead. World leaders express grief over his demise. Prime Minister of India Narendra Modi condoles the death of Japan's former Prime Minister, lauds Abe's contribution in strengthening the India-Japan relations. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar meets his Russian counterpart in Bali on the sidelines of the G20 Foreign Ministers meet. Vladimir Putin asks Ukraine to accept Moscow's terms or get ready to brace for the worst. Enforcement Directorate issues show-cause notice to Amnesty India International Private Limited. Indian shuttler H.S. Pranoy defeats Kanta Tsuneyama of Japan to enter the semi-finals of the Malaysia Masters Badminton at Kuala Lumpur. And in cricket, India to take on England in the second T20 International of the three-match series at Birmingham on Saturday. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.